If you grow up black in the United States, you learn very early that pain is not random. Pain is structured, pain is inherited, and pain is taught.
We cannot continue to accept these conditions of oppression, for this is not a struggle for ourselves alone. It is a struggle to save the soul of America.
Pain sits in the textbooks that erase your ancestors. It sits in the communities that are shaped by redlining. And pain sits in the jobs that you qualify for, yet you're never called for. And people may say, slavery ended long ago. Why are we still talking about race? I want to assure you that black struggle in America is not just a side chapter. It is the blueprint of the system. It was intentionally structured. That is why it persists until today. And so if you look down on a black American, if you talk down on a black American, if you try to demean the struggles of black people in the United States, then stay with me. So welcome to Black Stories. Today we want to look at the truth behind black struggles, behind black identity, and the African roots that many of us has been taught to forget.
Dr. G. Real stories, real people, unpacking the struggles, reclaiming the narratives with Dr. G.
Racism in America did not begin as a misunderstanding or some kind of a poor attitude. Racism actually began as a policy, a government-led policy. You see, the early United States tried to play a kind of a funny or impossible trick. They were shouting liberty, while at the same time they stood on stolen land and stolen labor from our ancestors in Africa. The Constitution refused to say black, but the Constitution spoke about us through loopholes in the document. They counted our bodies for political power, while at the same time denying our humanity.
And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
This was not prejudice. This was a racial caste system. And just in case you're wondering, caste means you inherit your position at birth. It's not something that you adapt to. It's not something that somebody wishes for you. It's an inheritance at birth. That is what caste is. That was the racial caste system that the United States policies operated upon. And for black Americans, that meant your parents were enslaved, your grandparents were enslaved, your great-grandparents were enslaved, and therefore you are enslaved. That is the reality. Talent did not matter. Intelligence did not matter. Faith did not matter. All that mattered was that you were born in an enslaved family. Your ancestors, you are a descendant of an enslaved people. That was the racial caste system. That is the racial caste system that influenced politics and policy in America till this day. This was deliberate. This was designed. This was engineered. And this influenced and shaped everything that came after till this day. When people say slavery ended in 1865, they speak as though oppression ended with it. But here's the bitter truth. The chains were removed, yes, but the mentality behind those chains remained. Reconstruction was a brief season, a time when black Americans built schools, held offices, farmed on their own lands, and when they even imagined a future free from domination. But make no mistake, because the response was swift. We had black codes, we had convict leasing, we had sharecropping, we had segregation, we had lynching, and of course we had systemic poverty. All those were the responses that came with that season, that small time of Reconstruction. And may I remind you, Jim Crow was not a cultural habit. It was a government policy that was meant to restore racial order. And so when someone asks you, why are black communities still behind? Let me tell you, the answer is straightforward. The reason is because every time that black Americans rose, the rules, the laws were rewritten to push them down. And when I came to the United States, I met black Americans who said, I'm not African. I do not feel connected to Africa. I am American, full stop. We even had the famous George Floyd made it very clear. He's American, full stop. He's not African. He's not African American. The truth is, there is pain in that statement. Because when they want to push black Americans down, when they want to ignore their contribution in this country, they give them a foreign identity, an identity which makes them strangers in this land. And so yes, for a black American to say they are not African, they are not connected to Africa, they should not be called African American, I can understand the pain that lies underneath that statement. Blackness in this country is not only a skin tone, it is an experience that is born from generations of struggles. And so the reality is, black Americans became a distinct people on this land, a new nation that was forged on fire. They are older here than many who claim their Americanness with pride. But here is the truth that many do not hear very clearly. Being African American does not mean that Africa is behind you. It doesn't mean that Africa is praying for your liberation. It doesn't mean that Africa is coming to save you. It simply means Africa is inside you. I'll say that again. It simply means Africa is inside you. Even if you have no map, even if your names were taken, even if the stories were erased, you should understand that your ancestors were not just accidents of history. They were farmers, healers, metal workers, horse trainers, cosmologists, seed keepers, thinkers, people who were stolen for their skills, not because they were worthless, not because they were slaves. Nobody was taken from Africa as a slave. Skilled people were taken from Africa and used with no fair payment, with no fair treatment. So those are your ancestors. Those are the people we're talking about. Skilled people who were taken away from Africa and made to work as slaves in America. The stories of these ancestors is the root, and Black America is the branch. And so you do not have to choose between the two. It's true that black struggles evolved into the civil rights movement, but let's be clear about one thing. It was not a miracle, and it was not a few famous speeches or a few figures who spoke so eloquently. No, it was strategy. It was sacrifice. It was ordinary people fighting against a system that was designed to pull them down, fighting against a system that was designed to outlast them. Black soldiers fought for freedom overseas, yet they returned home to America where they were segregated upon. Organizers boycotted buses for 381 days. Children faced fire hoses and dogs. Many people were beaten, they were jailed, they were killed. Nothing was given. Every single thing about the civil rights movement was earned. And when black neighborhoods erupted in the 1960s, the news called them riots. But no, they were not riots, they were rebellions. The language of a people who have been patient, a people who have been peaceful, and a people who had been ignored for so long. Their backs were against the wall and they had to push back. It's a rebellion, it's not a riot. And so the fight for civil rights is not a closed chapter. It is rather a bridge that leads into the present. And you know what this mimics? While all this was going on here, something else was happening in Africa in the same 1960s. A lot of African countries were fighting colonial rule. A lot of rebellion erupted in Africa. Many nations were fighting for their independence from the colonial masters. And it was not just on a bed of roses. It came with tears, it came with blood, it came with killing. But the people fought, and the people fought. Now what this reminds me is the connectedness that the African people had. What this reminds me is how much of pain the two sides had felt. And it may shock you why this fight were happening almost at the same time, in the same age, because these people originated from the same place, because these people were one people before, and they were fed up being enslaved. They were fed up being segregated upon. They were fed up being ruled by colonial masters. They were fed up being mistreated, and so they fought for their freedom in Africa, and in America they fought for the civil rights. All of these happening in the 1960s. And just in case nobody mentioned this in any history books, just in case nobody dug deeper to find out why is it that African countries were fighting for their independence at the same time that the civil rights movement was making headlines in the United States. They knew that their brothers are fighting against the same people who are dominating them back home in Africa. It could be the awakening of the black people around the world, the people who were taken, who were stolen from their lands, the people whose labor was used without any fair pay or protection. And so these people were revolting almost at the same time for their freedom and for civil rights. This is connectivity. This is the connectedness that nobody will tell you about. But today in the United States, the picture is complicated. On the one side, we see black CEOs, black professors, black medical doctors, black pilots, black artists, all of them shaping a global culture. And yes, the up escalator is real. But guess what is also real? The down escalator. We see mass incarceration of black people. We see police brutality and police violence on black people. We see educational inequality on black people. We see health disparity on black people. And we see economic vulnerability on a very familiar pattern. And guess what? There is another struggle. This time, it's the internal one. After centuries of hearing that you are less, some part of that messaging begins to settle in our minds. And so this is how white supremacy continues. Even when there is no white person in the room, the ideas do the policing. We start policing each other. We start pulling each other down. We start dividing ourselves. We start separating from each other because we want to belong. Because closeness to whiteness means you belong. Closeness to whiteness means you are accepted. And so we police each other internally. We create divisions. We escalate the divisions that were created because some people intentionally wanted us to stay divided. That is how we break. This is no news. When our ancestors were taken from Africa, when the skilled people were taken from Africa, they were never meant to stay together. They separated them in factions because they knew that African people together can always create something very powerful. And so today, we continue to police each other with the idea of white supremacy. That is the internal struggle that strikes me the most. The division has been so much internalized. You hear a young black American saying, I am not African. I have no connectivity with African. I will tell you, that is disrespecting the struggles of our ancestors. That is a total disrespect. That is a disregard. That is a demeaning of what our ancestors went through. Stolen from Africa, brought here, developed this place to what it is. And for some of us to say that we have no connection to Africa, we are not African, that to me is not honoring the struggles of our ancestors. It's erasing a history that is so dear to us. And once that history is completely erased as intended by the colonizers and the enslavers, then we have nothing to hold on to. And so when next time you say that you are not African, you do not connect to Africa in any way, I want you to remember that what you are trying to do is erase the history that formed this land, is erase that part of history that our ancestors carried with them. And now what do we do with this? The first thing is we must tell the truth. We must tell the truth about slavery as caste. We must tell the truth about Reconstruction as a betrayal, not something that was intended for our emancipation. We must tell the truth about Jim Crow as a law, a policy that was meant to put the black person down, that was meant to put the black person in a spot where segregation will continue and continue to pull us down. And we must learn to tell the truth about today's inequality as being part of that lineage. The second thing we need to do, we must inform ourselves, we must educate ourselves, we must learn our own history with a purpose, not just be gullible to anything that somebody hands down to us. We must begin to learn our history with a purpose. If you're black in America, ignorance is not harmless. It is someone else's victory. So if you carry yourself about being very ignorant about your history, you are handing victory to somebody else. We must reclaim art. We must reclaim joy, community, faith, and creativity. That is the one thing that our brothers and sisters, black Americans, champion the world on. They have far more qualities of creativity than any other person that I have seen, that I have come across. We must champion those. We must build them. And we can only do that if our strength, our unity is so tight. But when we keep talking about East Coast, West Coast, you are not black, I am more black, you are less black, I'm not African, I'm American, I'm this and that. When we keep separating ourselves into those factions, when we keep policing our blackness from within, that unity will be erased and our creativity, our collective power will be disintegrated. And guess what? Like I said, we will be handing victory to somebody who intended us to stay under. Black people have built worlds in a world that was never meant for them. And that is not romanticism, that is survival genius. We must stay in the struggle. In the classroom, in the boardroom, in city halls, in our families, our streets, and in our minds. Because the struggle will not just go away one day. We must intentionally and actively do something about it. And so we must stay in the struggle. We must never let down our guards. And so everywhere where decisions are made about whose life matters, black truth tellers and black storytellers must be in such rooms, must be in such places. Because I'll tell you, when the discussion is about us, without us, it is never for us. So if we are not part of the conversation, that conversation is not for us. It doesn't matter what you tell me. It doesn't matter how much good you try to convince me that the conversation is bringing to me. You're having that conversation about me without me, it's not for me. So we must be in those spaces where people discuss about whose life matters. And so I'll tell you, black struggle in America is not finished. And so is black resilience. As long as the struggle continues, resilience continues. This story began before the United States existed. And today, this story continues with you. You have a responsibility to carry this forward. You have a responsibility to tell this truth from one generation to another. And so I ask you, what will you do with the truth you carry? If this conversation spoke to you, please share it. And in the comments below, you can share your struggle, share your own black story, share your questions, your comments. Let's continue the conversation. Because when we tell the truth, then the lie does not get the last word. Black struggle is real. Black stories are powerful. And guess what? We are not done.
Dr. G. Real stories, real people. Unpacking the struggles, reclaiming the narratives with Dr. G.